Good morning, everyone. As you can see, my name is Calvin Nobles, and today we're going to talk about financial cybercrimes and how financial cybercrimes are beginning to disrupt our U.S. national security. So just think about it in terms of all of us have, most of us have our money in a bank. Most of us have some type of retirement plan with a financial organization somewhere. And just imagining that information being vulnerable and being attacked and being exploited and exfiltrated by cyber criminals. And cyber criminals are beginning to make a very decent living off this, because the more our systems become more interconnected, hyperconnected, what we like to call it, then our resources are becoming that much more exposed. Even though banks and other financial service organizations are doing everything within their power to protect our information and follow and meet regulatory compliance, it still is a very, very arduous and difficult fight to ensure that our financial resources are safe. Not only are we looking at cyber criminals, but we're also looking at nation states and non-nation states and terrorists that are also doing the exact same thing, targeting our financial resources through our different financial service organizations. A little about me. I'm actually employed in the financial sector, so this is why this is interesting to me. But what I'm going to present to you today is all my personal research. It has nothing to do with the bank that I currently works for. Just some of the things we're going to talk about today. Just research interests, the most cyber-type industries. We're going to talk about cybercrime, enabling crime, national security, and at the end I give you just some points to ponder. So if I go through these rather quickly, it's because we have some time constraints here, but nonetheless, the reason this is interesting to me, and I think it should be interesting to all of us, is because our financial resources are tied up in these financial service organizations. And so what I'm really trying to find out, to what extent is our national security at play when it comes to financial cybercrimes, and what factors are contributing to financial cybercrimes? And you're quickly going to see that three major themes are going to emerge from this: technologies, cybercrimes, and national security. So these are our most targeted industries from a cyber attack perspective. And so you see them listed over here on the left over here. But as you can see here, here's our critical infrastructure. And this is why the financial sector is so important to us, is because our financial sector is our underbelly. It is also our lifeline to economic health and our overall national security as a global nation, especially when we talk about what's driving some of the changes that's happening in the financial industry, globalization. We're talking about competition. There's a lot of competitions. One of the things that's really emerging in the last couple of years have been financial technology organizations. We call them fintech organizations. They're able to offer financial services that large banks cannot offer. For instance, if you need $45,000 right now, or whatever you need it, a bank might not be able to process that for you today because they have to go through all kind of legal hurdles, whereas a fintech organizations don't have all the paperwork. They're not regulated at this time, can provide you with that service. So that's what's, that competition. So banks are having to change. And one of those changes is between internet banking and e-banking. Those are great things to have. We have access to our money at any given time. However, that also comes with a risk, and there's consequences for that. And so in 2017, you look at the amount of money that our financial industry was managing. It's not that we have, they're just managing our assets, right? Some of our assets. And we're talking about $17.4 trillion. That's in 2017. And they was able to net an income of $164.8 billion. That's a lot of money. And that's why it's so attractive to cyber criminals. That's why it's so attractive to nation states as well. Because if nation states can get your resources without paying for them, that's just like more money for them. And so we know that there are countries targeting our banks. And so there's 29,000 financial service organizations in the United States. That is a large attack surface. And these are organizations like insurance companies, different type of investment companies, our large banks. There's numerous organizations that contribute to this. But that attack surface just keeps growing, and it becomes more manageable for us, become almost unmanageable for us to get our hands around, is because that attack surface keeps growing. And the reason I say that, don't think individually like as one individual bank. Like for instance, if your bank is Bank of America, don't think of it that way. Think of it collectively, all the banks. Think of the Federal Reserve as well, right? And so when you look at this collectively, it could cause an issue. Yes?
But like the targets that are possibly the least protected, it's not, JP Morgan and Chase or, Bank of America. It's the First Prairie Bank in central Wisconsin,
Right.
So it's a smaller pot, but it's way less guarded.
Yes, you're right. So some smaller banks are more they exploit it more because people think that they're not protected, but that's not necessarily the case. Smaller banks might be more protected than larger banks. Why? Because their attack surface is significantly smaller. So you think about, your Wells Fargo of the world, your Bank of Americas of the world, your Goldman Sachs of the world. Those companies got international footprints. They have to apply the laws apply differently when you go to different international boundaries. So the laws that we have in the United States might not apply the same in Asia. And so that could necessarily enable a vector inside of that organization. Not necessarily speaking, but it could. But some of the smaller banks, one thing they have a problem with is maintaining talent. And so that's a problem and a risk within itself because smaller banks, it's hard for them to maintain talent when larger banks offer more competitive compensation packages than just smaller banks. So it's a real issue. On top of that, we already have a shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the field to help protect banks. So again, it becomes it's more compounding for some of the smaller organizations. And as you can see right here, banks are doing just about everything they can do. They're investing a lot of money trying to protect themselves. There's a lot of regulations that are changing to help banks understand how to close up some of the more porous surfaces we have inside of the banks. However, though, it's not completely, it doesn't always work. There's no such thing as 100% when it comes to cybersecurity. Never, ever. Never. I don't want to say that again. In 2017, the financial industry suffered the most breaches. And the thing I always ask myself when I'm constantly doing this research is why? Why? It's because they are so attractive. The FBI recently said that our banks and our other organizations in the United States house more data than any other country alone. If you look at what a lot of organizations are doing now, you look at cloud computing and you look at data warehousing, significantly cheaper than it was several years ago. So people are beginning to save their data. The reason they're saving their data is because now we got artificial intelligence coming online. With artificial intelligence, you have to feed it through data. And so that's why companies are holding a lot of data. There's a risk to it. It's also a risk not investing in artificial intelligence to help you protect your organization. So it's like we're trying to win on one hand, but we're also increasing risk on the other hand. And I just wanted to point out on this particular slide right here, if you see the financial services organization, the cost of cybercrime, one incident, $18.28 million. Why is it so much more than some of the other industries? And one of the reasons I think this is that's driving the increased cost is if you look at the amount of regulation that the financial industry has to go through, the hurdles that they have to go through, that it's also increasing the cost. For instance, when you go out and you hire the services of like KPMG or Ernst & Young, those services don't come cheap. That's a lot of expertise that you bring into the table, but it's not cheap. It could easily help drive up the cost of one of these. And you always want to use a more reputable firm when you have an incident because they bring more resources to the table that you might not have. Banks, especially your larger banks do have a lot of organic talent for like being able to recover from an incident, but some of your smaller banks and some of your small insurance companies might not. So they have to, exclusively rely on that outside talent to come in, and that's a huge cost. That talent is not cheap when you bring it in. And I just wanted to show here, this is by country, when we start looking at like cybercrime, but look at the United States. And this is not surprising to me. The reason it's not surprising to me is the more economically stable and the more modernized your country is and your infrastructure is, the more you are prone to be attacked. I am not going to attack a poor country because the return on the investment is too low. It's too risky already. And what's driving this? I'm gonna give a presentation later in the afternoon, later this morning, that talks about this. It's because they have a place to go, a safe haven to go, to sell the data and the resources once they get it, the dark web. Sure. Yes. Because in Africa, they got a lot of infrastructure that's not really in place yet. So why it's not in place, people, like for instance, if you got a lot of immature hackers who don't really understand it, this is a great place to learn because the infrastructure is not really formalized yet. But when you start looking at countries like the United States and some of the countries over in Europe, it's different because we got very mature practices in place and we got very attractive financial resources in those banks and those other financial organizations. So why not? I'm just thinking like a hacker right now, because they say in order to catch a hacker, you got to think like one. I'm just saying.
So how does the Middle East gain 25%?
So the Middle East infrastructure is not really in place. They in a few years, and this is my prediction, in 2 years, the Middle East will be out here. Why? Because they are developing and maturing their processes right now. They're bringing a lot of things online. The more things you bring online, the bigger that your footprint becomes, the more difficult it is to protect. And so you're going to see this number expand out to the right here. Yes, sir.
Question regarding the percentages. Reported economic crimes, 57%, for example, in Africa, the top.
Right.
But the question applies to all of them. This is 57% of what? All crime, or what is this 57% of?
Yes, this is not all crime. This is just economic crime.
57%.
Yes, all
economic, and the rest is what? What is this comparison to?
So the rest of it will be like other crime, right? Other crimes, because you got economic crime, then you got cybercrime, you got like anti-money laundering, and the one thing we haven't done, we haven't combined. To me, all crime to me nowadays, especially when you're doing it via a system and you're not there, should be considered cybercrime. Does that make sense, sir? We still got silos. We haven't put them together yet. And I was just doing some research last night for Temple University, and that's one of the first things that stood out to me was that we still work in silos when it comes to crime and also to the risk associated with those crimes, because information security is not handled by all of the other risk partners, it's handled by the information security team. So we as a country, and not just us, but across the globe, we have to start looking at crime as a whole and break out of our silos, because then you're able to see the real risk, the overall risk picture from a strategic aspect rather than just looking at it from an individual aspect.
So this 57.
Where's the source?
Right here, this source right here came from, I want to say either Deloitte or KPMG. Okay.
So the 57% is the cybercrime.
The economic crime, yes. Economic crime.
Whether it was done through cyber or not.
Yes. And here's the thing when it comes to cybercrime. A lot of companies, a lot of countries, a lot of organizations do not report their cybercrime. The reason they don't do that is because they don't want the reputation damages and the reputation losses coming with that. Because soon as, for instance, let's think about the Equifax breach, right? I totally lost confidence in Equifax. First thing I did was call and have my credit locked down. And I encourage all of you to do the same. Have it locked down, because you don't know where your data is at this point. You can't account for it. Yes.
It doesn't work.
It does what not work?
Credit freeze.
Why not?
Because they use your existing account.
So for me, it works for me. And here's why it works for me. Because I already know what credit I have open, right? I already know what lines of credit I have existing, right? So for me, even when I just bought a car back in July, it took me 3 days to get the car. I had to call every credit agency and have my accounts unlocked. I like that. Nothing is foolproof anymore. Nothing is going to be 100%. But if I can impede a cyber criminal from having access to my credit, I'm going to do whatever I can to impede that individual. What's out there on the dark web or information out there, I can't do anything about it. But I can do something about it today. It's like sitting in your house in a crime-ridden area with the door unlocked. First of all, that's not prudent, but you're going to lock the door to impede that intruder from coming in, right? So we have to have the same approach when it comes to our personal data. But if you want to read a good book about it, why, again, you should do everything you can to minimize to protect your data. There's a book called Data, D-A-T-A, not David, Data and Goliath. A great book. And you'll see why I say you should do everything you can to lock down your data. So when we start talking about cybercrime, there's all kinds of sorts of cybercrime. But we really put them in these categories right here. Theft, hacking, identity theft, malicious theft, cyber terrorism, software piracy. I'm pretty sure I've stole some software before because I had back in the early 2000s, we should all download some music, right? That's software piracy today, by today's standards. So, and there's some other ones up there, but I like to focus on the attacks. Malware, spear phishing, man in the middle. This is what banks are notorious for losing right here, a man in the middle, because this is very difficult to control. So think about it. How many of us are logged on, we go to a hotel, we log on to the Wi-Fi? Raise a hand. A lot of us do. How many of us always turns our VPN on? How many of us have a VPN on our phone, our mobile devices? You should have a VPN. How many of us go to the library somewhere and log on? Right, you guys, right. That man in the middle, you don't necessarily know who you're logging on to. But that's okay if you got a VPN. Because when you establish that connection with a VPN, you're essentially establishing a tunnel. And that tunnel is going to protect your data. But again, nothing is 100% true. So it's like a chance. Is it worth the chance?
What is spear phishing?
Spear phishing meaning like, I know your name, I got your email address, I'm coming directly for you. I'm trying to do anything I can via email to get you to reveal information that I should not have, like your age, your address, whatever.
And whaling is what?
Whaling is when you're going after like the top person, CEOs. It's easy to go after CEOs and senior executives. Why?
Their names and stuff is public.
Exactly. And they're super busy all the time. Now you notice most of them have like 3 or 4 people in the office that have access to their email. Why? It's to help them control from being well. So for instance, if I was a smart hacker, I'm gonna socially engineer you. I know you're the CFO. I know everything about you. I know where you stay. I know about your family. I know you like to travel because I'm watching you on your social media accounts, right? And so based on those things, he's traveling, but I know he's going to be getting back at this time. I'm going to package up this nice email. Well, I need $2 million, and I need him to sign off on it. So I'm probably going to send it to him probably on a Friday afternoon, telling him that the CEO has already approved, and this is to support the board of directors. You see what I'm saying? So they put a lot of emphasis on things to get them to send money. And a lot of people send it, believe it or not. A lot of people send it. All you have to do is pick up the phone and say, hey, boss, did you want me to send this $2 million? And he said, what $2 million? That's when you know.
And couldn't they obviously play a shell game too as man in the middle? Because if you're traveling and you're, say, using a Citibank card, then Citibank can suddenly start playing a shell game. It's not so much a spearfish or a whale as it is a customer just kind of getting stuck because of a financial shell game.
Right.
Internationally.
Right. So again, a man in the middle, that's a great place to be to do an account takeover. If you log on and they're able to see what you're processing, that's a great place to take over your account. Anything else? Any other questions about this? Yes, ma'am.
So photos, I use VPN.
Okay.
But then people are saying that if you do use VPN, then the other side of it is that they can't identify you because now you're using a proxy. So some of your applications or websites that you're trying to use or gain access to, they won't allow you in because you have a VPN. So it's one
Ma'am,
thing.
relax, please. Let me get this presentation, okay? You're being very rude right now. It's 2 of us going today. All right? So we have 35 minutes apiece, right? I talked to you offline, ma'am, about it. Okay. So enabling cybercrime. The biggest vulnerability in any organization is the people. Social engineering target people. We have done very little to train people on to mitigate being controlled by social engineering. We don't have human factors programs to look at human-enabled errors. We don't. And the reason for that is that if you look at what's on the plate of your senior executives right now, it's like Thanksgiving. It's piled up to the top, and you're talking about doing one more program for them. We just don't have the bandwidth to do it, but we need to do it. I feel like if we're going to have to start looking at human factors, especially from a social engineering aspect, it needs to be driven by the federal government. It needs to be regulated. Our supply chains, the worst of the worst. I got a friend of mine that worked at a major contract company. He's the Chief Information Security Officer. They just did an assessment on their supply chain. 17% of their supply chain had an information security plan. 17%. And the company he works for, it's a $1 trillion contract. The other thing I want to point out here is internet banking and e-banking. Horrible. We have to give it to the consumers because they ask for it, but it's so risky. That constant access and that continuous access is also a window for cyber criminals. And because when you're working with consumers, you can't place the same amount of restrictions and complexity around multi-factor authentication or any type of authentication, because then you start getting into what we call authentication fatigue. So for the consumers, you have to do it differently. So that's why when I log on to my bank, I log in, put my password in, and then I get a 2-factor sent to my phone. You know, it's very simple. When I log on at work, not so. It's very, very complicated when I log on at work. Cybercrime. One thing I wanted to point out here is that the growth of cybercrime as a service. If you want cybercrime as a service, all you got to do is go to the dark web. You can pay for it, get anything you want, and they will execute it for you. Just like you paying for cloud services, software as a service, platform as a service, you can get cybercrime as a service as well. And we're talking about 2 billion mobile units in the world right now. And think about the countries who don't have, or their customers don't have mobile access right now, but those consumers are going to have mobile access within the next year or so. They're going to be perfect targets. They're not going to have the level of cybersecurity awareness to protect themselves. It takes time to build up that level of awareness. And the dark web, you hear me talk about this later this morning. The dark web is an amazing place. It's good and bad. And from a national security perspective, the attack on our financial industry isn't something that people just waking up and say, I'm going to try this today. It's really driven by a lot of nation states. And the reason the nation states are driving this towards us is to impede us as a country and to impede our national security effort. Because remember that first slide I showed you? And if you were to look across from the left side to the right side, a lot of those most targeted industries also align to our critical infrastructure. But if you really want to disrupt the United States, you disrupt us through our financial services. When we can't get access to our money, then we also cannot support our allies as well. Remember, because we have a lot of allies. And some of those allies don't come to the fight equipped with a lot of resources. We kind of give them financial aid to be able to be there with us. And so this is one way. If you want to cut our legs from up under us, cut our legs from up under us through financial resources. Disrupt it. And one of the things I like to show this slide right here, the National Security Agency got a data center. Look here, 300 million on tax per day. The reason I like to show this slide is because if I can disrupt you, if I can disrupt the National Security Agency and put an impact on them, guess what I do to the U.S. populations? You lose trust and faith in one of our most solid organizations that we have in this country. But again, our financial agencies that's our underbelly. And this is just a slide that just shows us cybercrime, malicious scans, 80 billion a day. Within 30 seconds to a minute, you hook up a new device, it's already been maliciously scanned. So that tells you how hyperactive our cyber criminals and hackers are in our environment. And points to ponder. If the United States was to ever get back in a major combat, the war is not going to be lost on the battlefield. The war is going to be lost with a lot of critical infrastructures, and that including our financial sector. All you have to do is disrupt it enough. You don't have to take it down, but disrupt it enough to cause what we call the fog of war, when things don't seem normal, when things aren't normal anymore, and where our financial industry is not able to process transactions, or where people don't have access to their money anymore. You create that fog of war and people lose faith in the financial sector. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right, that's all I got for you. Any questions? Go ahead, ma'am.
I just wanted to know who are the major cyber crimes in the world? Who are the major crime players? Yeah.
The major players? I say the major players are China, Russia, North Korea, your own neighbors, because they are cybersecurity professional by day, hacker by night, because there's no way they can really get caught on the dark web. Well, they can get caught, but it's very, very hard to track somebody on the dark web. Very difficult. So that's how I treat everybody as a cyber criminal, because I don't know you, and you don't know, you come to my house, you think I'm a cyber criminal too, because I got computers everywhere. And my time is up, so if you got a question, I'll be around in the passageway, but you can go ahead and make your point, sir.
I was just wondering, for big organizations to do something about the vulnerability, obviously penetration tests you could implement.
Yes.
Could you think of such a thing also in order to raise more public awareness so that citizens are aware of the risks of online banking, for example? Are there examples?
Yes. Yes. So Homeland Security put out a lot of training, and your bank should be putting out training. You should ask your bank where's their cybersecurity awareness training for the consumer. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for being here in this session, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak. I'm certainly giving a very, very different perspective on the issue of crime, specifically on cybercrime. And really what my talk is about is mind wars where cybercrime, cognitive science, and the arts intersect. So before I talk about how all these disciplines come together and merge, I'm going to walk through some basic facts. I know not everybody knows this, so let's just define first cybercrime, and it basically refers to the online criminal activities that are carried out through the internet using computers. All right, well, so who are the perpetrators? They're known as hackers. As we heard on the previous speaker, obviously maybe many of us ourselves are hackers for each other. The different types that exist out there are many. I mean, these are just a few here. I'll walk through a little bit of them. Malware through hacking, phishing, spear phishing, spamming, child exploitation, pornography, which we heard earlier actually in the keynote, hate crimes via cyberstalking, drug and human trafficking, also earlier we heard about, money laundering, social engineering, ransomware, cryptojacking, cyber physical attacks, trust attacks, organized crime, cybercrime gangs, state-sponsored attacks, cyber terrorism, organization insiders. I could keep going on and on here, all the way up to IP and data theft. And so what are the causes behind all of these criminal activities? Well, they basically roundabout to economic, personal, religious, political, and ideological reasons. And keep that in mind, because I'm going to be returning to that and how that's relevant to bringing in the cognitive sciences and the arts. The primary motivator, as we all know, we've heard previously, is money. That's what it boils down to all the time. And what is it that these hackers are after? Well, it's really about the exploitation of the huge digital safety gap that's resulting from the internet and the explosion of big data, especially when we had that in the 1990s and now in the early 2000s, and now today even more so. So again, before I enter into where all these disciplines come together in the title of my talk, I want to go through the history really of how these nefarious crimes really have been occurring through a time frame here. So from 2001 to 2010, we can think of the problem really as what was known as the carding era. And this was basically all about credit card fraud. From there, we entered into 2011, where we had then breaches, which was basically the loss of confidential information and personal data. This then led into the 2012 post-PC era. So this is now where we're using other technologies outside of the personal computer, and all of this data is now merging, and attacks are being occurring now within social media. Then in 2013, we have the big era of the digital bank heist. This is really when stolen payment card numbers, bank accounts, and personal identification information was the real hit mark at that point, which led into 2014, known as the cyber attack era. And this is really when we had the loss of a massive and really massive global level amounts of confidential financial data and irreparable reputation damage. This then led into the following years, in 2015, to what we call the big Botnet Busts. And this was about leaking large-scale data now to the general public. Leading into 2016, where we have the digital extortion era. Now this is where compromised emails are happening with ransomware, which is then pushing into 2017, which became where ransomware literally reigns supreme. That is the ultimate form in which now global outbreaks are causing enterprises enormous amounts of loss of money and data and multiple pieces of information. And then 2018, which is now merging into 2019, and really the future is our current reality, in which we have mainly a very large Russian underground operation occurring, in which they're continuing to digitally extort individuals, now using Internet of Things and other connected devices. We have also the Beck scams via phishing. We have fake news now and cyber propaganda. We also have, because of AI, artificial intelligence technology, and blockchain, now malware is outwitting those new technologies. And then popular platforms, again, because of the rise of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so forth, now all of that combined is also being attacked. So hopefully what you can see from this is that year by year, things are occurring, they're getting more sophisticated, more complex, and they're just becoming more global at all levels, from the technology sense to the people sense. So you may be asking, okay, have there been cybersecurity wins given that there's been so many attacks? This is actually a great graph that came out from the U.S. Security Service Criminal Investigation Division, in which they did a wonderful report in which they literally tracked all those wins that they have been able to have with prosecution and arrest from 2003 to 2010. And so this graph literally delineates year by year the individuals that were found, prosecuted, and the types of crimes they did. And then the point of their research report was really to bring that out to the general public so they knew, look what's happening and look at the individuals that are doing this. Further from that, from 2011 to 2018, that's continuing from their graphs, from their research paper, it's also a wonderful depiction of really all the major cases combined, which happen to be about 74 people. That, again, those are major cases. That does not mean there aren't many more. There are many more numbers, but these are the primary ones in which the majority have come from Russia. And they have been arrested and prosecuted, and we've seen that they've been put into having to serve jail time from as little as 3 years all the way to 27 years, and some people are still serving that time, certainly the ones that had more recently been prosecuted. So what this means is that with so much crime, really a lot of money is being spent into cybersecurity. And what I mean by cybersecurity, really, it can be broken down to these categories, from application security to software countermeasures, information security, network security, disaster recovery plans for organizations, operational security, also within organizations, from small businesses to large organizations, and although mentioned here, end user education, unfortunately, that is the one that sort of gets left on the side and people forget about. And yet that is really the essential part of the cybersecurity armor, which I'm going to be focusing in a bit. So with all of these, so much money being spent, are we safe? No, we're not safe. And we're not safe because sophisticated attacks continue to rise. And cybercrime is now completely globalized, and much of it is actually outsourced. So even though it may be coming from individuals from a certain nation, they also are outsourcing to other individuals within their network, and then within their network, and within their network, really causing a domino effect at this point. So why are we not safe? Well, fundamentally, cybercrime is, I'm going to call it in quotes here, the perfect crime. Why? Because it is minimal risk. And of course, this is coming from the side of the hackers. It's anonymous. It's scalable. You only need one person really to compromise an entire global network. And it's highly profitable. People are literally getting paid to do this. And criminals basically hide behind networks, and they're making it very difficult to trace and prosecute them, precisely because they are coming through hidden networks and then networks within networks within networks. And so we also should make sure that we make a differentiation between what we call macro versus micro level cybercrime. And we can, of course, look at the sum of the large-scale global or private cyber attacks, because criminals are more often not actually looking for smaller actions to avoid attention and to go unnoticed. And that's when usually when individuals talk about the type of organizations that are being attacked, it's not always the big companies, yes indeed, but it's also the small businesses, precisely because they may not have the financial resources to bring in cybersecurity measures. And to sort of get a sense of what I mean by the micro level cybercrime, you can sort of think of it as what we call invisible scams. And invisible scams refer to the types in which charities and medical agencies are being attacked, or just basic job and employment sites, ticket and travel, business loans, banking, credit card, online accounts, pyramid schemes, investments and wire bank frauds, people actually posing as governmental officials, and unexpected inheritance, real estate, or even lottery winning. So I give you this picture here because these are literally things that we deal with every day, right? You know, you go, oh, I have a trip to take. You go immediately to the website. You assume everything is legitimate, and you just go and buy your ticket. Who knows really how much all of that has already been targeted. Another way to also think about this is to really understand how all of this is happening at a global scale, at the macro scale. And so this is what's known as the organized cybercrime gangs. They mainly operate from Eastern Europe and Asia, and within Asia it's primarily coming from China. We've already been hearing this from the earlier talks. Their targets are really all across the globe. However, they tend to target mostly rich English-speaking countries, so mainly the Western world. And again, as we heard previously, that's because there are many more availability of options for which to penetrate different systems. Their focus is really high-volume bank wire fraud, and the purpose of that is really just to carry out fraudulent transactions against banks, and obviously then that means organizations, and then you as the individual as part of a bank. And now that we're dealing with mobile technology, their main method is actual mobile malware and social engineering schemes, and the whole point again is to steal and launder large sums of money. And they're actually using this through banking Trojans, and here's a little graph of the most active Trojan banking families. There's about almost a handful of them. My point from that, the take-home message really is that the fact that there are already a handful, 2 handfuls, means there's probably going to be more, and they're just constantly growing and in complexity and in their ability to connect between each other. So let's go through some stats. So banking Trojans have caused about 1.5 trillion in losses. This was 2018. It's projected to rise even further for this and the following years. 92% of malware was actually delivered via email. And through email, specifically through spear phishing, because it's directly targeted to a single individual. And so if that single individual falls for that attack, then that ends up targeting the organization, and more globally, the bigger network or bigger business in which they're part of. The top malware threat is crypto mining, not necessarily ransomware, and 90% of it comes from remote code execution attacks. So again, really pointing out the factor that everything is not just at a single local scale, but really is at a global level. Major attacks just in the US alone, I pretty much put the major companies that have been hit since 2016 all the way to today. As you can see, all the big companies, and that's already been mentioned also earlier. And again, it's not just the big companies, it is then the smaller businesses, precisely because they may not have the financial means. But that's what's also interesting, because these guys supposedly have the financial means to have counter-attack measures, and yet they're still not immune to such cyber attacks. And I will get questions afterwards. Yeah. So we can say, okay, what's the industry response? There is a lot of industry response. The initial claim the industry is saying is, well, we're simply making more sophisticated software. The problem is that this software is completely inadequate and nothing is 100% secure. And you can talk to company executives from these particular software companies. You can talk to the technologists, to the engineers, and every single one of them will tell you, you can use our company's products and all the other thousands of companies' products combined, and you're still vulnerable. Of course, now artificial intelligence, it's the hot new tech. That's what people are using now. And machine learning algorithms can indeed help. But the problem is that adversaries can actually easily manipulate these security algorithms. And furthermore, the resources actually in order to implement these AI-based threat detection algorithms are not accessible to all. So that means only a handful who have the financial, first of all, who have the knowledge that that's available. And then second, will have the financial resources to go out and buy those products It's very few at the end of the day. And so what that means is now that we're now dealing with AI-enabled smart attacks, and this is also what's helping for the globalization and the networks of the networks of the networks to be occurring so quickly. So with all of that happening, you can say, okay, well, what about the controlling in terms of cybercrime at the macro level, again, at the global scale? Well, nationally here in the United States, several government agencies, the FBI, DHS, CIA, DOD, NSA, and NIST are all working together really to counter cybercrime. So each of these different agencies have their own programs and their own ideas and methods for which to create their counterattacks. However, they are now talking and collaborating to create more cohesive and collaborative type of cyber attacks. At the international level, we do have the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, and their whole point really is to operate in all regions of the world to fight collectively, locally and nationally and globally, such issues against illicit drugs, human trafficking, and cybercrime, for which now illicit drugs and human trafficking is happening all now through the internet. If you look at results from FBI cases, which we know that FBI is the lead federal agency for investigating cyber attacks by criminals, overseas adversaries, and terrorists, we find out there are three main issues arising. Well, one, most of the US cybercrime is actually committed by individuals, including federal workers. So those who actually had access prior to, say they were working in a federal agency for quite a while, they know intimately well how that organization operates. They don't, when they leave, it's not like that memory erases. So they know the inner workings. And so that's posing a major problem. Also, major cases have specifically here in the US involved scams, threats, banking, money laundering, government, child exploitation, pornography, and human trafficking. And then again, also, if you look through their cases, we realize, and again, as I mentioned earlier, that most of these attacks are originating primarily Eastern Europe, Russia, and in Asia and China. And so we can say, okay, what's happening now at the legal level? Well, internationally, when we take the human rights perspective, so back to the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, they actually are all about protecting what we call information and communication technology users, ICT users, more generally. And what I mean by more generally, it means mitigating and preventing harm to people, data, and systems, and the infrastructure as individuals and as a collective. And so what this means is that this office has also established social legal sanctions for cybercrime. They've identified standards of acceptable behavior for ICT users. And what that means is that they actually have included provisions, a list of them, on the jurisdiction, investigative powers, the rules of evidence that can be used for criminal procedure relating to any sorts of data collection, for data wiretapping, search and seizure, and data preservation and retention. And again, all of these are really important issues to take in mind because data now on the internet is dynamic. It is constantly changing, and it's growing even on top of what was original. In other words, what is an original piece of data? We don't know anymore precisely because it is dynamic. They've also implemented several international treaties now relating to cybercrime, and they have, due to all of this work and discussion, collaboration, they have now enabled proper investigation, prosecution of crimes that are committed online, and that means that they have facilitated across the world cooperation between countries and on cybercrime matters. So the questions are, well, okay, are there cybercrime prevention measures that we as individuals and therefore organizations can use? And you probably have heard of this checklist. I'm going to go through it because, believe it or not, we probably see it all the time, and many of us ignore it all the time. What is it? So they say, use a full-service internet security suite, use strong passwords, keep your software, like your antivirus, updated, keep up to date on major security breaches, do know what's happening out there, take the measures to protect yourself against identity theft, look for the HTTPS in the web address line, avoid using public Wi-Fi, skip emails and texts you don't recognize. Basically everything we do, right? Don't click links from emails you don't recognize. Limit online sharing. Stop using Google Docs, even Dropbox. Check the sites you're shopping on. Consistently monitor your accounts. Be careful about downloading and know what to do if you actually become a victim of any of these cyber attacks due to not following any of these measures. And the only box that I have checked is the one that says, in spite of such measures, cyber attacks and cybercrime keeps growing. So that's the one thing we know is happening, and even though we know the rest, we kind of just, whatever. We ignore it. And so why does cybercrime keep growing so quickly? Well, as you can probably guess by now, the problem is that many obstacles do stand in the way, really, to the effective identification, investigation, prosecution of cyber criminals. And therefore, that means the prevention of cybercrime at both the macro and the micro levels. And part of this is because the clarity and the safeguards really that are in place are not clear, really, to ensure that laws are placing actual restrictions on internet access and the type of content that enters into the internet and that is used, and whether or not it's being abused or even one is complying with the rules of law and human rights. And here in red, this is what's most significant to now what I'm going to enter into the concept of the cognitive sciences, is that there's really a blindness to the role that human psychology and behavior have at the core of it all. And it seems that people this is what has been permeating the various levels of countermeasures available, and people simply have been ignoring that and forgetting that we are all human at the end of the day. The cost of all of this, $3 trillion today, expected to double by 2021 to $6 trillion, and the average data breach is 7.5 million. So what this is telling me is that positioning cybersecurity only from a computational technological perspective at both macro and micro levels is deeply short-sighted. So remember this laundry list we went through? The problem with it is that it takes time, it occupies memory space, it requires imagination. Imagine if you have to keep changing your password. Ideally you should be changing it every day at this point. And what this really means is that it requires a lot of cognitive effort. This is it's basically human psychology 101. So what does this mean? To me, this means that we really need to focus on human-centered factors. And what do I mean by human-centered factors? Well, it means considering the elements of perception, cognition, behavior, and social environments. You may be asking, okay, well, why is all this relevant? Well, system and data breaches really are more often than not the result of human psychological weaknesses. Just think of these issues here, these psychological mental states: deception, dominion, fear, trust, urgency, and your desire for power. What I'm saying here is that human psychology really is the weakest link in the cybersecurity armor. So if you think about it, adversaries, defenders, and users, really, we are all humans here. And human psychological weaknesses, which really we should be calling vulnerabilities, are indeed a gold mine for adversaries to achieve their criminal goals. And the adversaries actually are constantly evolving and innovating in ways to target us, valuable humans, actually less so than the infrastructure. In fact, they're targeting more human psychological behavior than infrastructure because they know that there are a lot of computer science engineers, really smart, who know how to build these infrastructure and software problems. And so they're like, no, but the general public doesn't know that. So I'm going to go after the desires and the wants and what people expect and what they want in life to really attack them. And so the main point here is that one user's mistake really is what causes an entire network to be compromised. And so you have defenders who are motivated to be prepared, to have resilience, to be on the defensive side, and to act. But then you have the adversaries, psychological motivations that are all about financial, political, social, cultural, emotional gains. So for me, the way I see this problem, it's really all about creative minds at a war with each other. Basically, who can be the most creative person to outwit the other creative person to see who wins the game at the end of the day. And so you could be asking, well, has human behavior been totally ignored in all this aspect from the technological standpoint, from the machine learning standpoint? No, not entirely. So several research studies have applied human factors for cognitive computing applications, to create cognitive models of the decision-making process, Bayesian reasoning for evaluating different types of mental models in real time. Behavioral analytics, of course, do take human psychology into account in computer systems engineering, and specifically in its role in game theory. However, the problem is that all of these models and studies have mainly focused on simulations of existing or past attacks to prevent, detect, mitigate, and recover. That means they're not thinking about how to truly be predictive. Furthermore, they follow a unidirectional pattern from beginning to end, and they lack a dynamic, multi-directional patterns. The way we humans work is that we're constantly receiving input, we're constantly receiving also, so it's a feed-forward, feedback way in terms of how we understand the world. So to simply go unidirectional is actually to go against human psychology and how we operate in the world. Furthermore, all of these models lack unique human intelligence elements like, and these are key, there's a big message, take-home message that to take away from here, it's all of these elements. Knowledge transfer from one domain to another, how we're capable of taking knowledge that we know from one particular task to move it into another. Imagination, our capacity for imagination. Our capacity for dynamic predictive abilities depending on the context in which we're in. The emotional learning we deal with all the time, whether it's through rewards or punishments. And of course, that means positive or negative ways in which we learn. Improvisatory decision making, so when you enter into a new environment, you have to improvise what you're going to do in the moment so that you can have a successful outcome. Focus attention. A lot of how we operate in the world is with a goal in mind, so we have to focus on that particular task so we can actually have a successful outcome. The expectations and biases we carry with ourselves and others carry and that we merge together. The working memory that's constantly being used in real time between short-term memory and long-term memory. Contextual real-time adaptability, so that's how you adapt to the moment to actually then be able to lead to a successful outcome. Open-ended problem solving, you're not literally like all the machines and artificial intelligence that exist today, you can only do one task. You actually can do many tasks, again, because you can transfer knowledge and information from one and carry it into the other domain. And fundamentally, what this refers to is the concept of creativity. So it falls under the umbrella of creative thinking and doing. So what do we do? Okay, so what's the proposal? So like the existential crisis that actually the healthcare industry is dealing with right now, where we can no longer just treat disease after the fact, but we need to prevent disease with a holistic perspective on mind, body, and environment, cybersecurity needs a similar paradigm shift. We need to spend far more serious efforts in predicting and preventing human creative behavior before the attack, not just ad hoc. And really, we are at a point where we need new methods in order to do so. So I mentioned the arts at the beginning of my title. Hopefully you're wondering, okay, what does that have to do and what's the relevancy in all of this? So I actually speak to you not just as a cognitive brain scientist, but also as an artist. And I can tell you with 100% statistical confidence here that the arts really are a fantastical cognitive behavioral framework from which to understand really the multi-layered complexity of human behavior. Because doing and creating art actually involves many of the processes I just listed in terms of our capacities of intelligence, which include dynamic decision-making, problem-solving, real-time improvisation, multi-sensory integration, adaptability, imaginative creativity, rapid, short, and long-term predictive analysis, collaborative exchange, and response action. If you think about, if you ever go to anything that's cultural or artistic, you're probably thinking, I'm just here for an aesthetic enjoyment, entertainment, effect, experience. But if you think about what the artists are doing, you're actually integrating and taking in all that information that they are using based on their knowledge of the world and of their art form to be able to translate it to you. So there has to be this type of communicative, unseen, unheard context that's happening, and this is all boils down to cognition, perception, and behavior. So hopefully it sounds familiar in some way if you happen to be in the cybersecurity arena, and this is specifically for cybersecurity situational awareness. And why that? Well, because that whole point is to holistically understand an enterprise's information security environment to efficiently and accurately predict and respond to potential threats. So what does that mean? Basically, it means being aware of the network today so that you can be aware of the potential threats that are coming and that are constantly evolving. And then also, it means being aware of the mission of your organization, you as an individual and then as an organization, and the types of needs you need to be aware of the network and of the types of threats that are incoming and currently ongoing. So what this means is really, what if we were to rethink cybersecurity R&D and end-user education policies, because the often foregone end-user education training that describes and obfuscates, honestly, the problem instead of explaining it is entirely insufficient. And again, and we've heard in the previous talks that end-user education kind of is the thing that gets relegated to the end simply because people argue we don't have infrastructural resources to do it and we don't have the finances to do it. So instead, really, and this is really coming from my proposal and the work that my company has been doing, is that we should be making a theoretical and cognitive analogy between real-time improvisation and adaptive problem solving within the arts and the inventive threats perpetrated by hackers, as well as defenders' predictive creative problem solving required to thwart those hackers. And this means by integrating the R&D work, so the research and development work my company has done on human creativity and intelligence using the arts, precisely because we have been developing a cognitive behavioral model of spontaneous real-time adaptability and decision-making. So I'm going to explain this a little further so you can see how the arts really are entering into this. So using live theater and musical improvisation, our goal has been to identify the wide variety of factors, which include complex variables like emotion. Remember I mentioned that way earlier in the beginning as a reason for cyber criminals to engage in criminal activity. And so how all of those factors are implicated in real-time problem solving to establish an ecologically realistic, predictive model of possible improvisatory outcomes. So here's a diagram of the cognitive model that we have created, and I'm going to zoom in so you can understand this a little bit more. So what I'm showing here in this box is that because I'm looking at the live theater musical improvisation situation, I'm using it as data from which to understand these issues of improvisation and decision-making in real time. And so these boxes simply are showing that I'm breaking down the visual and linguistic information that's happening in the scene and all their different characteristics, as well as what's happening in the mental model of the musical improviser that's reacting in real time to what's happening visually and linguistically in front of them. Then further in this box, I'm breaking down all the different types of features and elements that are involved in these visual linguistic elements, as well as further breaking down how they are then translated into musical variables and forms. And of course, all of this is going to be dependent on the knowledge in real time of the individuals engaged in the artistic act, but also in the individuals that are perceiving and watching this in real time. And then this box simply highlights the types of emotional and non-emotional information the improviser, as well as actually the performers on stage, are engaging in which they have to represent information in a physical sense. And so this adds then to the visual, linguistic, musical, and physical variables that are now converting and representing information and are being communicated through various cues and signals. And then finally, the audience that's perceiving all of this and how all of those different mental models are affecting their personal mental model as they attempt to understand the artistic scene in front of them. So what I'm saying here is that by merging various theories, actually methods, data, and ways of thinking within the cognitive brain sciences and the arts, we've come to a point where we've created a global mental model that consists of identifying the micro mental models, which include emotional influences, knowledge structures, ideation phases, and incoming information that are fundamental to improvisatory real-time adaptive behavior necessary for success within a changing environment. And this is extremely relevant because this is equivalent to the mental models of hackers who are spontaneously adapting in real time to the continually changing cyber landscape to stay literally N steps ahead of their volatile victims, which should be equivalent to the mental models of the defenders who are spontaneously predicting, adapting in real time to the incoming, now continuously changing cyber attacks so that they can steer away from end steps from the perpetrators or the hackers. So remember I have this chart up here of cybercrime basic facts, and I'm going to highlight here the causes where it said the economic, personal, religious, and political and ideological. These are the ones that are leading these hackers to create these crimes. Well, at the end of the day, these are really emotional motivators of our beliefs, wants, and desires in life. And these are the complex human variables at the root of cybercrime. So this is the underlying effect. This is why hackers are doing this. And so we humans actually are very efficient at dynamically understanding the various features of these variables. And I have shown this empirically through the artistic work that I briefly summarized. And this is actually what we must be integrating within our detection and prediction models, whether we're using artificial intelligence-based models or non-artificial intelligence-based models. And so really to conclude here about what a cognitive framework within cybersecurity implies or should be is that we really have to remember that cyber users and cyber criminals, so all of us here, and cyber criminals are humans at the end of the day. And complex human cognition behavior like improvisatory and collaborative real-time adaptive problem solving, decision-making action should be understood, should be addressed, and it should be significantly integrated within simulations and newer machine learning and deep learning tactics that are now being used to counteract these cyber attacks by industry, but also the types of policies we should be using for end user education. And human art-based cognitive behavioral models can actually be quite predictively useful towards developing highly sophisticated mathematical models to then fine-tune those algorithms for both the data mining required and the AI training towards detection of advanced persistent threats, which are all the ones that I discussed earlier. And so cybersecurity situational awareness, again, I bring this up because it fundamentally requires integration of past events with incoming multisensory information to creatively adapt to the ever-changing environment. So we have to now cross disciplines. We've entered this point where we have to cross these disciplines precisely so that we can integrate what we know and what we need to know about human perception, behavior, and cognition to basically hack the minds of hackers as they are hacking our own minds. So really, it's predicting what the hacking mind is going to do. And what this is saying is that IT professionals certainly are simply not enough at this point. And we know this because, again, when you talk to all of these companies creating the software and infrastructure, they all admit very openly, very freely, yeah, you can use our products, everybody else's products, and you're still insecure because it boils down to the human, the user at the end of the day, who's going to click on that, or who's going to, on that link, or who's going to push that button. And so we really need an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary perspective right now, literally, if we want to come up with far more sophisticated advanced machine learning and deep learning algorithms to now counteract these predictive models that we could yield. So thank you for listening. So if you want to contact me here at Monica at lpmproductions.com or learn more about my company, you can actually scan there in the QR code reader if you want to learn more about this. So any questions now? I know there were some hands.
What is your background? You said, are you a hacker?
No, I'm not a hacker, but I am a cognitive brain scientist, a computational scientist. So I know very well what's happening in the machine learning, deep learning sense of all of this and the types of elements. So basically, I don't know people's backgrounds here in terms of whether you understand the whole machine learning, deep learning issue, but in just like a very quick summary, you can think of all of these technological things, phones, computers, everything as what we call narrow intelligence. So they're simply capable of doing single type tasks that they've been programmed to do. We humans have general intelligence because we're capable of open-ended problem solving and this capacity that I mentioned of transferring knowledge from one domain to another. So that's what allows for our openness and our improvisatory behavior. So that is right now the multi-billion-dollar question really is creating machine learning, deep learning algorithms that can mimic, that are human-like in the sense of general intelligence. And then, yeah.
So on your slides on the major cyber attacks, do you have like a percentage of success or failure of these attacks?
Oh, you mean in terms of which are more successful than?
Yes, like you had, I think, Citibank, Bank of America.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so do you have an idea like how successful were these attacks?
Well, all of them were so it depends what our metric of success was. So all of them were successful in the sense that the hackers were able to get in and basically read and have access to all the relevant private information, data, everything. So obviously it's going to depend on what data we're talking about based on the company, if it's financial or if it's so banking type, if it's on social media, and then, or if it's what you're buying at Home Depot stuff, or athletic wear, Under Armour. So yes, they were all successful in that they compromised the system completely. Well, an individual or multiple individuals compromised the system. Hackers were able to acquire all that data. And so the next question becomes, what are they going to do with that data? And so that's where things get really creative, right? Because it boils down to what can you come up with to make as much money possible to profit off of those enormous amounts of data. That in a way you might think, well, okay, they found out that I bought a t-shirt at Under Armour, who cares? But the problem is that once you aggregate the t-shirt, plus let's say many other times you go to Under Armour to buy whatever, other athletic wear, plus your social media account, they know where you are, they know what you do, they know what you like, and then we enter now into the problems we saw with the election, right? Political campaigns. So then we're making these big leaps between the types of attitude or the types of behaviors you do and pushing that to lead to the types of attitudes you could have, the way you think. And then how can I manipulate the way you think now that I know what you buy and what you like? That's
Minority Report movie.
Yes.
So people
Exactly.
make that come alive is what it looks like.
That's what they're trying to do. And so as someone who's
Why would they want to do that?
Why would they want to make that come alive?
Why would you want to make, human beings become movies instead of the other way around? Like, having that be a separate part of creativity that doesn't really intersect with real human beings.
I think it boils down to we humans are, what is it, curiosity kills the cat at the end of the day. We humans are extremely curious. We want to know why in the world we are what we are as humans, and so we are attempting. We are to yeah, no, I see what you're saying, and there are arguments as to this has ethical problems, sustainability problems, moral problems, cross-cultural issues, and yet, I mean, so there, I think we need to make a difference. There's the scientists, the engineers who are working at this from a scientific discovery standpoint, and that's certainly the perspective I take. But then also as somebody who's in the industry, in the private sector, I'm out taking this knowledge and I'm talking to industry precisely to say, you know what, we need to press the brakes on this. We really need to sit down as a nation and as a global, as a universe, as a world to address these issues before, and instead of waiting for the attack to happen. So,
but once you have a helicopter over vulnerable snow
Mhm.
and an avalanche happens,
Mhm.
you can't stop it.
yeah. Well, I mean,
no matter how much you wish it would stop.
it's
and there's no Supergirl that will stop it.
correct. I mean, it's like with climate change. Look where we got to this point. Look at cyber. It's the same.
Well, that's what's
Cybercrime. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I'm so sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. You can welcome to have questions outside, but unfortunately,
Yes.
we're at the time. Another panel. Thank you so much.